The pale winter sun cast long shadows across Havenwood's sprawling grounds as Winifred Grantley clutched the worn letter in her trembling hands. 4 years since she had fled London in disgrace, yet the past remained an ever-present spectre. She smoothed her modest governess gown, plain grey wool that matched the overcast English countryside, and tucked the letter into her pocket before anyone could notice her distress. "Miss Grantley, you appear quite pale." "Are you unwell?" Lady Thornfield's voice cut through Winifred's thoughts. "Merely a slight headache, my lady, nothing of concern." The lie came easily after years of practice. Winifred had become adept at concealing her true self beneath a veneer of quiet competence. Lady Thornfield nodded, satisfied with the explanation. "Well, do see that you recover quickly. The Duke of Valmont arrives tomorrow, and I expect the children to be on their best behaviour. His Grace is considering my niece Catherine for marriage, and everything must be perfect." "Of course, my lady." Winifred curtsied, keeping her gaze fixed on the floor to hide the flicker of panic in her eyes. The Duke of Valmont, her heart raced. Hugh Valmont, the very man whose path she had spent 4 years carefully avoiding. Once alone in her small chamber beneath the eaves, Winifred removed the letter from her pocket and read it again, though she had already committed every word to memory. "Dearest Winnie, they are asking questions again. The Duke of Valmont's solicitors have made inquiries about the events of that night. I have kept our secret, but I fear they draw closer. Take care, dear friend. With concern. Mary." The paper crumpled in her grip. Hugh Valmont's arrival could not be coincidence. Had he discovered her whereabouts? Did he know who she truly was? Winifred moved to the small looking-glass hanging on her wall. At 26, her once celebrated beauty had been deliberately dimmed. Her rich chestnut hair was severely pulled back, her vibrant green eyes downcast, her countenance carefully arranged into an expression of quiet servitude. The transformation was complete. From Winnie Grantley, the scandalous belle of London whose name had been splashed across every society gossip sheet, to Miss Grantley, the reserved governess with an impeccable reference from a fictitious family. "He will not recognize me," she whispered to her reflection. "He cannot." For recognizing her would mean remembering that night, the scandal, the disgrace that had sent her fleeing from London. It would mean remembering her brother, now dead. It would mean uncovering the secret she had buried alongside James's body. The next morning brought clear skies and a flurry of activity to Havenwood. Servants polished silver, arranged flowers, and prepared the finest rooms for the Duke's arrival. Winifred kept the children, 10-year-old twins Edward and Elizabeth, occupied in the schoolroom, far from the main entrance where the Duke would be received. "Miss Grantley, why must we practice our Latin today?" Elizabeth complained, her blonde curls bouncing as she fidgeted in her chair. "Uncle says the Duke is bringing his hunting dogs. I want to see them." "Your education comes before entertainment," Winifred replied firmly. "The Duke's visit does not excuse neglecting your studies." Edward groaned dramatically. "But he's the most famous sportsman in England. They say he once tracked a wounded stag for 3 days through a blizzard." Winifred's hand paused over her book. Hugh had always been determined, relentless when pursuing his quarry. That trait had made him both a legendary hunter and a dangerous adversary. Famous or not, he is merely a visitor to Havenwood. She forced her voice to remain steady. "Now conjugate these verbs." The sound of carriage wheels on gravel drifted through the open window. Winifred's breath caught as she moved to close it, catching a glimpse of a magnificent carriage bearing the Valmont crest. 4 matching black horses, their coats gleaming in the sunlight, drew the vehicle to a halt before Havenwood's grand entrance. The door opened, and Hugh Valmont, the 8th Duke of Valmont, emerged. Time had only enhanced his commanding presence. At 34, he stood tall and broad-shouldered, his posture impeccable in a perfectly tailored riding coat. His dark hair, once worn longer in his youth, was now cut in the fashionable style of the day, accentuating the sharp angles of his face. Even from a distance, Winifred could see the intense focus in his expression as he surveyed Havenwood. She stepped back quickly, heart hammering against her ribs. He was more handsome than she remembered, more imposing, and infinitely more dangerous to her carefully constructed life. "Miss Grantley," Elizabeth's voice startled her. "Are you well? You look as though you've seen a ghost." "I'm quite well," Winifred lied, turning away from the window. Now, where were we? The children were summoned to the drawing room that afternoon to be presented to their distinguished guest. Winifred had planned to excuse herself, claiming a need to prepare their lessons, but Lady Thornfield insisted on her presence. "The Duke has expressed interest in the children's education," she explained, adjusting her elaborate lace cap. "He values learning above all else, having been educated at Oxford himself. You will attend and speak of their progress should he inquire." Dread pooled in Winifred's stomach as she followed the children into the drawing room. She had altered her appearance as much as possible, donning her most severe dress, a high-necked brown wool that had seen better days, her hair pulled into an unforgiving bun beneath a plain cap. She would keep her eyes lowered, her responses minimal. Surely, after 4 years, and with her changed appearance, he would not connect the reserved governess with the vivacious debutante he had known briefly in London. The drawing-room fell silent as they entered. Winifred kept her gaze fixed on the ornate Persian carpet, noting its intricate pattern as she curtsied alongside the children. "Your Grace, allow me to present my nephew Edward, my niece Elizabeth, and their governess, Miss Grantley." "I am pleased to make your acquaintance," came the Duke's deep voice, rich and cultured, exactly as Winifred remembered. "I understand you are both excellent scholars." The children murmured their responses, but Winifred felt the weight of the Duke's gaze upon her. She raised her eyes just enough to acknowledge him with a slight nod, careful not to meet his gaze directly. "And you, Miss Grantley," he continued, his voice betraying nothing, "how long have you been employed at Havenwood?" "3 years, Your Grace," she responded softly, modulating her voice to disguise its natural cadence. "Miss Grantley came with the highest recommendations," Lady Thornfield interjected. "The children's improvement under her guidance has been remarkable." "I have no doubt," the Duke replied. Something in his tone caused Winifred to glance up involuntarily. Their eyes met for the briefest moment, his dark blue, penetrating, intelligent. She saw no flash of recognition, only polite interest, yet she could not help the shiver that ran down her spine. "The children are fortunate to have such dedicated instruction," he added, turning his attention back to Lady Thornfield. "Education forms the foundation of character, after all." Winifred retreated to the background as the conversation continued, allowing herself to breathe only when the children were dismissed, and she could escort them from the room. As they reached the doorway, the Duke's voice stopped them. "Miss Grantley." She froze, turning slowly. "Yes, Your Grace." "I wonder if you might show me the library tomorrow. I understand Havenwood possesses a remarkable collection of botanical texts, and I have some interest in the subject." Before she could formulate a refusal, Lady Thornfield answered for her. "Of course, Miss Grantley is quite knowledgeable about the collection. She spends much of her free time there." "Then it's settled," the Duke said with a slight bow. "Tomorrow morning, if convenient." "As you wish, Your Grace." Winifred curtsied again, panic rising in her chest as she led the children away. That night, sleep eluded her. The Duke had shown no sign of recognizing her, yet his request to meet in the library seemed deliberate. Hugh Valmont had never expressed interest in botany during the London season they had shared. Could it be mere coincidence, or was this a trap carefully set? She rose at dawn, exhaustion clouding her thoughts. If the Duke suspected her identity, would he expose her? Would he reveal what he knew of that terrible night? The scandal would not only ruin her, but would devastate the Thornfields, who had treated her with nothing but kindness. At precisely 10 o'clock, Winifred entered the library, having arranged for the children to practice their music with the visiting instructor. The vast room, with its towering shelves and comfortable reading nooks, had always been her sanctuary at Havenwood. Today it felt like a battleground. The Duke stood by the tall windows, his back to the door, hands clasped behind him as he surveyed the extensive gardens. Morning light illuminated his profile, casting half his face in shadow. He turned at the sound of her entrance. "Miss Grantley," he acknowledged with a slight nod. "Thank you for accommodating my request." "It is my pleasure to assist, Your Grace," she replied, keeping her voice measured. "Lady Thornfield mentioned your interest in botanical texts. The collection is primarily located in the east alcove." She moved toward the shelves, maintaining a proper distance, her steps measured and deliberate. The Duke followed, his gaze sweeping over the library's grandeur. "A magnificent collection," he observed. "Though I must confess, botany is not my true interest this morning." Winifred's heart stuttered. She reached for a shelf to steady herself, fingers grazing the leather-bound spines. "No. No," the Duke's voice lowered as he stepped closer. "My interest, Miss Grantley, is in you." She forced herself to meet his gaze, schooling her features into an expression of polite confusion. "I'm afraid I don't understand, Your Grace." "Don't you?" His eyes, sharp and perceptive, studied her face. "I find it curious that a woman of your obvious education and refinement would choose to bury herself in the countryside as a governess." "Many women find fulfillment in teaching, Your Grace," she countered, retreating a step. "The position suits me well." "Indeed." He selected a book from the shelf, idly turning its pages. "And yet, there is something familiar about you, Miss Grantley. Have we met before?" The question hung between them, dangerous and weighted. Winifred drew a careful breath before answering. "I cannot imagine where that might have been, Your Grace. My life before Havenwood was quite unremarkable." "Was it?" He closed the book with a snap. "You see, I have an excellent memory for faces, even those that have changed considerably." Panic flared in Winifred's chest. She turned away, moving to straighten books that needed no straightening. "If that concludes our tour of the library, Your Grace, I must return to my duties." "I knew your brother." The words struck like physical blows. Winifred gripped the shelf, her knuckles whitening. "James," he spoke of James. "You mistake me for someone else," she whispered. The Duke approached, standing close enough that she could smell the subtle notes of sandalwood and bergamot that clung to his clothing. "Do I?" "James Grantley was a friend once, before the incident, before his sister vanished from London society." Winifred turned to face him, abandoning pretense. "What do you want?" Something like satisfaction flashed in his eyes. "So it is you." "Winifred Grantley, the toast of London 4 seasons ago, until my name became synonymous with scandal," she finished for him, her voice barely audible. "Have you come to expose me then? To finish the destruction of what remains of my life?" The Duke studied her, his expression unreadable. "I haven't decided yet." "Then why are you here? Why seek me out after all this time?" "Because there are questions about that night that remain unanswered." His voice hardened. "Your brother died under suspicious circumstances. My cousin was implicated in a crime he insists he did not commit. And you, the only witness, disappeared." Winifred's composure threatened to crack. "The past is buried, Your Grace. Let it remain so." "Is it?" He moved closer. "Is it truly buried, Miss Grantley, or merely hidden like you beneath a facade of respectability?" Before she could respond, the library door opened. Lady Thornfield entered, followed by a striking young woman with copper-colored hair and a fashionable walking dress. "Ah, there you are, Hugh," Lady Thornfield exclaimed. "I've been searching everywhere. Miss Catherine Ellington has arrived for her visit, and I thought you might wish to escort her through the gardens." The Duke stepped away from Winifred, his demeanor shifting seamlessly to that of the perfect gentleman. "Miss Ellington, a pleasure to see you again. I would be delighted to show you Havenwood's renowned gardens." Catherine Ellington offered her gloved hand with practiced grace. "The pleasure is mine, your grace. I've heard so much about the famous rose collection." Winifred watched the interaction, painfully aware of the purpose behind Miss Ellington's visit. Lady Thornfield had made no secret of her hope for a match between her niece and the Duke. A suitable alliance, wealth, title, and beauty united, everything society valued. "Miss Grantley, you're excused," Lady Thornfield said, barely glancing in her direction. "The children should be finishing their music lesson by now." "Yes, my lady," Winifred curtsied, avoiding the Duke's penetrating gaze as she hurried from the library. She found temporary refuge in the empty schoolroom, her thoughts chaotic. Hugh Valmont knew who she was. Worse, he was investigating James's death, reopening wounds that had never truly healed. If he exposed her identity, she would lose everything: her position, her reputation, the modest security she had built. The week that followed became an elaborate dance of avoidance. Winifred kept the children occupied with additional studies and outdoor excursions, carefully timing their movements to ensure they never encountered the Duke or his prospective bride. When forced to appear at dinner, she spoke only when addressed directly, keeping her responses brief and impersonal. Yet despite her efforts, she felt the Duke's attention like a physical presence. When she glanced up during prayers, his eyes were often on her, thoughtful and assessing. When she walked with the children in the gardens, she would turn a corner to find him observing their progress from a distance. He was gathering information, she realized, building a case. On the 5th evening of his visit, a footman delivered a note to her chamber. The Duke requested her presence in the library after the household retired for the night. The message contained no threat, but the implication was clear. If she refused, he might speak openly of her past to Lady Thornfield. At 10:30, when Havenwood had fallen silent, Winifred made her way through the darkened corridors to the library. She had changed from her plain day dress into her one good gown, a deep blue merino wool that she reserved for Christmas services. If she was to face her accuser, she would do so with whatever dignity remained to her. The library was illuminated only by the fire and a single oil lamp on the mahogany desk. The Duke stood before the hearth, still dressed in his evening attire, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He turned at her entrance. "You came," he observed. "I wasn't certain you would." "You left me little choice." Winifred remained near the door, keeping distance between them. "What is it you want from me, your grace?" He gestured to a chair. "Please sit. This may be a lengthy conversation." "I prefer to stand." A hint of admiration flickered across his features. "Still stubborn, I see. Some things haven't changed." The Duke set down his glass and retrieved a leather portfolio from the desk. "4 years ago, my cousin Roland was accused of cheating at cards in Lord Pembroke's gaming hell. Your brother James confronted him, claiming to have witnessed the deception. A duel was arranged for the following morning." "I know what happened," Winifred interrupted, her voice strained. "I was there." "Yes, you were, the only woman present at an illegal duel." The Duke opened the portfolio, removing several documents. "But what happened after the shots were fired? Roland was found unconscious, James was dead, and you had vanished. My cousin claims he can remember nothing of that morning." "Perhaps that is convenient for him." "Perhaps," the Duke approached, documents in hand. "But there are inconsistencies in the accounts. The surgeon who examined James's body noted that the fatal wound came from a different angle than where Roland had been standing. And this," he held up a yellowed newspaper clipping. "A report that a woman matching your description was seen boarding a coach to Dover that same day, in the company of a man." Winifred's breath caught. "You've been investigating all this time." "My cousin's reputation and freedom depend on the truth." His voice softened slightly. "As, I suspect, does your peace of mind." She turned away, moving to the window where rain now pattered against the glass. The darkness beyond mirrored the shadows of her memory. "What good would the truth do now?" she asked quietly. "James is dead. Nothing will change that." "Justice might be served," the Duke replied, "for all involved." Winifred laughed bitterly. "Justice? There is no justice in this world for women who step beyond society's boundaries, Your Grace. Only judgment and condemnation." "Try me." He moved to stand beside her at the window. "Tell me what happened that morning, Winifred, not as the Duke of Valmont, but as Hugh, who once danced with you at Almack's and thought you the most fascinating woman in London." The memory of that night, of swirling across a polished floor in his arms, of laughter and lightness before everything shattered, pierced her defenses. Winifred closed her eyes, momentarily overwhelmed. "It was not Roland who killed James," she finally said, her voice barely audible over the rain. "It was Lord Pembroke." She could feel the Duke's surprise in his stillness. "Pembroke," he repeated. "He wasn't even present at the duel." He arrived just as the shots were fired. Roland's bullet grazed James's shoulder, a minor wound. But then Pembroke appeared, raging about debts and disgrace. Winifred's hands trembled as she continued. "James owed him thousands, money we didn't have. Pembroke had been pressuring him to marry me off to settle the debt." "To whom?" the Duke asked sharply. "To himself." She met his gaze, unflinching despite the shame that colored her cheeks. "I had refused his advances earlier that season. He thought to obtain through my brother what he could not win directly." Understanding dawned in the Duke's eyes. "And when you refused?" "He threatened to expose James's debts, to ruin what remained of our family name." Winifred turned back to the window. "The duel with Roland was a matter of honor, but it was also James's attempt to win enough to pay Pembroke. When he failed, Pembroke took matters into his own hands," the Duke finished. "He shot James." Winifred nodded. "Roland had fallen, struck his head on a rock when he stumbled backward from the Recal. No one else saw, only me. And when Pembroke realized I had witnessed the murder, he came for me." The Duke's expression darkened. "Did he harm you?" "He tried," she answered, "but James's second, Mr. Halloway, intervened. He helped me escape, secured passage to the continent. By the time I returned to England months later, the story had been settled, Roland accused and cleared due to insufficient evidence, James remembered as a reckless gambler who died as he lived." "And you became Miss Grantley, the governess," Hugh said softly, "burying Winifred along with your brother." "It seemed the only way to survive." She straightened her shoulders. "Now you know the truth. What do you intend to do with it?" The Duke was silent for a long moment, studying her with new understanding. When he spoke, his voice carried a gentleness she had not expected. "Why did you return to England? You could have established yourself elsewhere, away from the scandal." The question caught her off guard. She had never spoken of her reasons to anyone. "This is my home," she said simply, "and I could not bear the thought of Pembroke continuing his life unpunished while James lay forgotten." "You've been gathering evidence," the Duke realized. "The correspondence you receive, it's not from family, is it? It's from those helping you build a case against Pembroke." Winifred did not confirm or deny his assessment. Instead, she asked, "Will you expose me to Lady Thornfield?" "No," his answer came without hesitation. "Your secret is safe, at least for now." "But Winifred," he stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of grey in his blue eyes. "Pembroke is a dangerous man. If he discovers you've returned, that you're collecting evidence against him." "I am aware of the risk," she replied. "I have been living with it for 4 years. You need not face it alone any longer." The Duke's hand moved as if to take hers, then stopped. "Allow me to help, for James's sake, if not your own." Winifred searched his face for deception and found only sincerity. Still, years of caution made her wary. "Why would you help me? Your cousin is cleared either way." "Because justice matters," he said simply, "and because the Winifred Grantley I remember deserved far better than the hand fate dealt her." Something long dormant stirred within her chest, a dangerous hope. She quelled it immediately. And what of Miss Ellington, your impending engagement? A shadow passed over his features. Catherine is a lovely young woman, but there has been no understanding between us. Lady Thornfield's aspirations notwithstanding. Yet you came to Havenwood to court her. I came to Havenwood, he corrected, because I received information that a woman matching your description had been employed here. Catherine's presence was coincidental, or rather, Lady Thornfield's convenient addition. Winifred absorbed this revelation with conflicted emotions. So your interest in me is purely investigative. The Duke's lips curved in a slight smile. I wouldn't say purely. Before she could respond to this unexpected admission, a sound from the corridor caught their attention, footsteps approaching the library. They separated quickly, Winifred retreating to the bookshelves as the Duke moved to the desk, assuming a casual pose. The door opened to reveal Catherine Ellington, wrapped in a silk dressing gown, her copper hair loose about her shoulders. "Hugh," she called softly, before noticing Winifred. Her expression shifted from invitation to cold assessment. "Oh, I didn't realize you were occupied." "Miss Ellington," the Duke acknowledged with perfect composure. "Miss Grantley was just assisting me in locating some historical texts for my research." Catherine's gaze flickered between them, doubt evident in her expression. At this hour, how dedicated of her. The Duke requested information about the library's medieval manuscripts, Winifred explained, adopting her most professional tone. I was providing a catalogue of the collection. I see. Catherine stepped further into the room, her dressing gown parting slightly to reveal an expensively embroidered nightgown beneath. Well, don't let me interrupt your scholarly pursuits. Though, Hugh, I had hoped we might continue our conversation from dinner, about the London season and your mother's upcoming ball. The Duke inclined his head. Perhaps tomorrow would be more appropriate. It's rather late. Catherine's smile didn't reach her eyes. Of course, how thoughtless of me to disturb your studies. She turned to leave, then paused, glancing back at Winifred. Miss Grantley, you seem familiar somehow. Have we met in London? Winifred's heart raced, but her expression remained impassive. I rarely visited the city, Miss Ellington. You must be thinking of someone else. Must I? Catherine studied her with calculated interest. Strange. I'm usually quite good with faces. She smiled again, cold and assessing. Well, good night, Hugh, Miss Grantley. When the door closed behind her, Winifred released a shaky breath. She suspects something. Catherine has always had a keen eye for potential rivals, the Duke observed, though in this instance her suspicions may prove dangerous rather than merely inconvenient. Rivals, Winifred repeated, startled by his implication. The Duke approached her again, his expression serious. We should continue this discussion tomorrow, somewhere more private. The old gazebo in the West Garden, perhaps. It's rarely used this time of year. You wish me to meet you alone, unchaperoned? Winifred shook her head. I cannot risk such impropriety. My position here is already at risk, he finished gently. Catherine will be watching you now. We need to establish a plan before she connects you to the Winifred Grantley of London society. She knew he was right, though every instinct warned against further entanglement. Very well, after the children's luncheon. They nap for an hour, and I am not expected elsewhere. Until tomorrow, then, the Duke bowed slightly. And Winifred, thank you for trusting me with the truth. As she slipped back to her room, Winifred wondered if she had made a grave mistake or taken the first step toward redemption. Either way, her carefully constructed world had begun to unravel. The following morning brought unseasonably mild weather, as if winter had temporarily retreated to allow a glimpse of spring. Winifred found herself distracted during lessons, her gaze drifting to the window that overlooked the West Garden and the weathered gazebo that stood among dormant rose bushes. Miss Grantley, you said the same thing twice, Elizabeth pointed out during their history lesson. Are you feeling unwell again? Forgive me, Winifred replied, collecting herself. Let us continue with the reign of Queen Elizabeth I. The remainder of the morning passed in a blur of arithmetic, geography, and Latin conjugations. When the nursery maid arrived to supervise the children's luncheon, Winifred gathered her shawl and a book as pretense, then made her way through the manor's winding corridors to a side door that opened onto the kitchen gardens. She followed the gravel path past bare vegetable plots and leafless fruit trees, her heart pounding with each step. What she was doing was foolish, meeting a man alone, risking her reputation and livelihood. Yet the possibility that Hugh Valmont might help her bring Pembroke to justice was too compelling to ignore. The gazebo appeared through the trees, its white paint peeling from years of neglect. As she approached, she saw the Duke already waiting, his tall figure silhouetted against the weathered trellis. He wore riding clothes, dark breeches and a forest green coat, and turned at the sound of her footsteps. "You came," he said, echoing his words from the previous night, "against my better judgment." Winifred remained at the gazebo's entrance, reluctant to step further into the secluded space. The Duke gestured to a stone bench that had been wiped clean of debris. "Please sit. I've brought something you should see." She hesitated, then entered, taking a seat at the far end of the bench. The Duke remained standing, removing a folded newspaper from his coat. "This was published in London 3 days ago," he said, handing it to her. "Page 4, the society column." Winifred unfolded the paper with trepidation, finding the indicated section. Her breath caught as she read the brief paragraph. "Lord P. announced his engagement yesterday to Miss D., daughter of the American shipping magnate. The wedding is to take place in June, with a substantial settlement rumored to accompany the bride. Lord P. has lately been seen in the company of several moneylenders, suggesting his fortune may not match his extravagant lifestyle. He's marrying an heiress," she murmured, "to cover his debts." The Duke nodded. History repeating itself, it seems. Pembroke continues to gamble beyond his means, then seeks to repair his finances through advantageous marriages. That poor girl, Winifred's fingers tightened on the paper. She has no idea what kind of man she's agreeing to marry. Unless someone were to tell her, Hugh suggested, his gaze intent. Or better yet, expose Pembroke for what he truly is, a murderer and a scoundrel. Winifred looked up at him, understanding dawning. "You wish to use my evidence against him." "Combined with what I've gathered, yes." The Duke sat beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his presence in the cool air. "Winifred, I've spent 4 years investigating my cousin's case. In that time, I've documented Pembroke's gambling debts, his violent temper, his mistreatment of women. What I lacked was an eyewitness to James's murder." Hope and fear warred within her. Even if I came forward, who would believe me? A disgraced woman against a peer of the realm. "The world is changing," Hugh said quietly. "Slowly, perhaps, but changing nonetheless, and you would not stand alone." There was a promise in his words that made her heart flutter treacherously. "What are you suggesting?" "A return to London," he replied. "Not as Miss Grantley the governess, but as Winifred Grantley, under my protection and sponsorship." "Your protection," she repeated, incredulous. "That would cause a scandal far greater than my original disgrace. The Duke of Valmont championing a woman of tainted reputation. Society would be aghast." "Society," Hugh said with unexpected vehemence, "can go hang." The declaration stunned her to silence. The Duke of Valmont, with his impeccable lineage and position, suggesting such disregard for propriety, it seemed impossible. "You don't mean that," she finally managed. "I do." He turned to face her fully. "Winifred, when you disappeared 4 years ago, I searched for you, not merely because of Roland's case, but because he paused, seeming to gather himself, because I had admired you from the moment we met. Your intelligence, your wit, your refusal to simpering with the other debutantes. She shook her head, disbelieving. We barely knew each other. We shared 5 dances, he corrected with a slight smile. 3 conversations about Shelley's poetry, and 1 rather heated debate about women's education. You called me insufferably arrogant. You were, she responded automatically, then pressed her fingers to her lips, surprised by her own candor. Hugh's smile deepened. Perhaps. But you were the only woman in London brave enough to tell me so. When you vanished, something significant was lost, not just to your family and friends, but to me as well. Winifred stood, overwhelmed by his words and their implication. This is madness. We cannot simply pick up where we never truly began. Too much has happened. I am not that woman anymore. Aren't you? Hugh rose as well, his height forcing her to tilt her head to meet his gaze. I see her still, in your devotion to your students, in your determination to seek justice, in the fire that you try so hard to conceal. He stepped closer, and Winifred found herself unable to retreat. The question is not whether you are still that woman, but whether you will allow yourself to be her again, to step out of the shadows of the past. And if I cannot, she whispered, if I have become too accustomed to the shadows, then I will respect your decision, he said softly, but I hope, Winifred, that you might consider another path, one where you need not hide any longer. The intensity of his gaze, the sincerity in his voice, threatened to unravel years of careful restraint. Winifred felt tears stinging her eyes and turned away, unwilling to let him see her vulnerability. I need time, she said, to consider what you've proposed. Of course, Hugh stepped back, giving her space. I remain at Havenwood for another 3 days. Until then, I will say nothing of what we've discussed. She nodded, composing herself before facing him again. Thank you, Your Grace. Hugh, he corrected gently. When we are alone, at least, I would hear my name from your lips. The intimate request sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cool air. Hugh, she echoed, the name feeling both foreign and familiar on her tongue. His smile in response was worth the small concession. Until tomorrow, Winifred. She watched him walk away, his tall figure disappearing among the bare trees, and wondered how her carefully constructed existence had been so thoroughly upended in the space of 2 days. That evening, Lady Thornfield announced an impromptu ball to be held at Havenwood before the Duke's departure, a chance for local society to meet the distinguished visitor and, Winifred suspected, a final opportunity to promote Catherine's suit. Preparations began immediately, with invitations dispatched to neighbouring estates, and the ballroom opened for cleaning. Miss Grantley, the children will attend for 1 hour, Lady Thornfield informed her during dinner. You will ensure they are properly dressed and behaved. Afterward, Mrs. Jensen will see them to bed, and you may have the evening to yourself. Yes, my lady, Winifred replied, keeping her expression neutral despite her relief. A ball meant social obligations for the Duke, hours when he would be too occupied with local gentry to seek her out. Her reprieve was short-lived, however. As the family dispersed from the dining room, Catherine Ellington approached, her smile deceptively sweet. Miss Grantley, a moment of your time. Winifred had no choice but to acquiesce, following Catherine to a small sitting room off the main corridor. Once the door closed, Catherine's demeanour changed entirely, her smile vanishing. I know who you are, she stated without preamble. Winifred's heart pounded, but she maintained her composure. I beg your pardon. Don't play the innocent governess with me. Catherine circled her slowly, like a predator assessing its prey. You're Winifred Grantley, the same Winifred Grantley who fled London 4 years ago after her brother was killed in that scandalous duel. You are mistaken, Winifred replied, forcing her voice to remain steady. Am I? Catherine laughed, the sound sharp and without humour. I was only 16 during your season, but I remember the gossip, how you teased and flirted with half the eligible men in London, including the Duke, how your brother gambled away your family fortune. How you disappeared the very day he died." She leaned closer. "What I wonder is whether the Duke knows his little governess's true identity." Winifred met her gaze unflinchingly. "Whatever you believe, Miss Ellington, is of no consequence to me. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have duties to attend to." As she turned to leave, Catherine caught her arm. "The Duke is mine," she hissed. "I've spent years cultivating this connection. I will not have my future jeopardized by some disgraced nobody playing at respectability." "Release me," Winifred said quietly, "or I shall be forced to call for assistance." Catherine's grip tightened momentarily, then dropped. By tomorrow evening, Lady Thornfield will know exactly who she's harboring in her home. "Enjoy your last night at Havenwood, Miss Grantley." When Catherine swept from the room, Winifred sank onto a nearby chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her. The sanctuary she had built was crumbling. By this time tomorrow, she would once again be homeless, her reputation in tatters. Unless she accepted Hugh's offer, the thought came unbidden, accompanied by equal measures of hope and trepidation. To return to London under his protection would mean facing her past, confronting Pembroke, risking everything on the chance that justice might finally be served. And it would mean trusting Hugh Valmont with her life and future, a man she had known briefly 4 years ago and who had re-entered her world with the power to destroy or save her. By morning, Winifred had made her decision. She rose early, penning 2 letters, one to Lady Thornfield explaining her abrupt departure, and another to the children, expressing her affection and regret at leaving without a proper farewell. She packed her meager belongings into a single trunk, set aside her best dress for the journey, and waited. At precisely 9 o'clock, a knock came at her door. She opened it to find not a servant with her morning tray, but the Duke himself, his expression grave. "Miss Ellington has spoken to Lady Thornfield," he said without preamble. "They are currently in conference in the morning room. I thought you should know." "Thank you," Winifred replied, stepping back to allow him to see her packed trunk. "I anticipated as much." Hugh's gaze moved from the trunk to her face, understanding dawning. "You're leaving." "I must, before Lady Thornfield dismisses me without reference." "And where will you go?" he asked quietly. Winifred hesitated, then committed herself to the path she had chosen during the long, sleepless night. "That depends on whether your offer still stands." Hope flickered in his eyes. "It does." "Then I accept your protection," she said softly, "and your help in bringing Pembroke to justice." Relief transformed his features, making him appear younger, less careworn. "My carriage can be ready within the hour. Pack only what you need. Anything else can be acquired in London." "I have little enough," she replied with a small smile. "The advantages of a simple life." Hugh stepped closer, his gaze intent. "Winifred, are you certain? Once we take this path, there can be no turning back." "I've lived in shadows long enough," she answered. "Perhaps it's time to step into the light, whatever consequences may follow." The journey to London passed in a blur of changing horses, roadside inns, and hushed conversations. To maintain propriety, or at least the appearance of it, Hugh had arranged for his housekeeper to accompany them, a stern-faced woman named Mrs. Cooper who regarded Winifred with a mixture of curiosity and reserve. "You'll stay at Valmont House until suitable accommodations can be arranged," Hugh explained as their carriage entered the outskirts of London. "My widowed aunt, Lady Marston, has agreed to act as your chaperone and sponsor your reintroduction to society." "Does she know the full circumstances?" Winifred asked, anxiety building as familiar landmarks appeared through the carriage windows. "She knows enough," Hugh replied. "Aunt Elena is remarkably progressive in her thinking. She also detests Pembroke, which made her particularly receptive to assisting our cause." As they passed through Mayfair, Winifred drew back from the window, suddenly fearful of being recognized. 4 years had changed her, but not so completely that an acquaintance might not notice her distinctive green eyes or the arch of her brow. "Second thoughts?" Hugh asked gently, noticing her withdrawal. "Not second thoughts," she corrected, "merely the natural apprehension of a fugitive returning to the scene of her flight." His expression softened. "You are no longer a fugitive, Winifred. You are a woman seeking justice, with the full support and protection of the Duke of Valmont." The carriage turned onto a broad, tree-lined street and came to a stop before an imposing townhouse. Valmont House stood 4 stories tall, its classical facade gleaming white in the afternoon sun, discreet evidence of wealth and position in every architectural detail. As footmen hurried to open the carriage door and lower the steps, Hugh offered his hand to Winifred. "Welcome to your new beginning." 3 weeks later, London society buzzed with speculation about the mysterious Miss Grantley, lately returned from an extended sojourn abroad and now residing with Lady Marston, the Duke of Valmont's formidable aunt. Rumours abounded that she was a distant relation of the Valmonts, that she was a foreign princess travelling incognito, that she was the Duke's secret ward. Winifred endured the scrutiny with as much grace as she could muster, bolstered by Lady Marston's unwavering support and Hugh's frequent visits. Her transformation had been remarkable. Gone was the severe governess, replaced by a refined lady in fashionable gowns, her natural beauty enhanced rather than concealed. Yet beneath the elegant exterior, Winifred remained focused on her purpose. Each day brought them closer to gathering sufficient evidence against Lord Pembroke. Hugh's solicitors had located 2 additional witnesses, a former servant of Pembroke's who had overheard his master threatening James, and a retired officer who had been present near the dueling ground and glimpsed a 3rd man fleeing the scene. "We are building a compelling case," Hugh assured her during one of their daily meetings in Lady Marston's drawing room. "But to present it effectively, we need one final element." "What more do we need?" Winifred asked, setting aside the correspondence she had been reviewing. "A public confrontation," he replied. "Pembroke must be forced to reveal his true nature where others can witness it." Lady Marston, seated nearby with her embroidery, nodded in agreement. Men like Pembroke maintain their position through fear and the appearance of respectability. Shatter that illusion publicly, and his house of cards will collapse. "But how?" Winifred asked. "He would never agree to meet with me." "He won't need to," Hugh said, a determined glint in his eye. "The Duchess of Richmond's ball is 3 days hence. Pembroke will attend with his American fiancée. We will ensure you receive an invitation." Winifred paled at the suggestion. "A ball, Hugh, I cannot possibly." "You can," Lady Marston interrupted firmly. "And you must. I've watched you these past weeks, my dear. You possess more courage than you credit yourself with." "Elena is right," Hugh added gently. "This may be our best opportunity. The Duchess's ballroom will be filled with the most influential members of society, people whose opinion matters, whose witness carries weight. And if Pembroke simply ignores me, or worse, if he denounces me as the disgraced sister of a gambler," Winifred's voice trembled despite her efforts to control it. Hugh moved to sit beside her, close enough that their hands nearly touched on the settee. "He won't have the chance. We'll ensure the confrontation happens on our terms, with evidence at hand." Lady Marston set aside her embroidery and rang for tea. "The more pressing question, my dear, is what you will wear. A returning society lady must make the proper impression." The night of the Duchess of Richmond's ball arrived with unseasonable warmth, as if summer had decided to make an early appearance. Valmont House bustled with activity as Winifred prepared for what might be the most significant evening of her life. Lady Marston had spared no expense on her protégée's attire. Winifred stood before the mirror in her chamber, hardly recognizing the woman reflected back at her. Her gown was a masterpiece of silver-blue silk, its bodice adorned with delicate crystal beadwork that caught the light with every movement. Her chestnut hair had been arranged in an elegant style, with a single diamond clip, borrowed from Lady Marston's collection, providing the perfect accent. "You look magnificent," Lady Marston declared, entering the room in her own gown of deep purple. "Hugh will be utterly enchanted." Winifred flushed. "This evening isn't about enchanting the Duke." "Perhaps not entirely," the older woman conceded with a knowing smile. "But I'm not so old that I can't recognize when two people are perfectly suited. My nephew has never looked at any woman the way he looks at you." Before Winifred could formulate a response to this startling observation, a footman announced that the Duke's carriage awaited. Lady Marston gathered her shawl and fan, gesturing for Winifred to precede her. "Remember, my dear," she said as they descended the grand staircase, "no matter what occurs tonight, you do not stand alone." Hugh waited in the entrance hall, resplendent in formal evening attire. His expression as Winifred appeared on the stairs made her heart flutter, a mixture of admiration, pride, and something deeper that she dared not name. "You are breathtaking," he said simply, offering his arm as she reached the bottom step. "Thank you," she murmured, accepting the support as much for her suddenly unsteady legs as for propriety's sake. The journey to Richmond House passed in nervous silence, broken only by Lady Marston's occasional comments about the weather and the likely attendance. As their carriage joined the queue of elegant vehicles approaching the brightly lit mansion, Winifred's courage nearly failed her. "I'm not certain I can do this," she whispered to Hugh. "To face all of society after so long." He covered her gloved hand with his own. "You can, and you will not face them alone." When they were finally announced at the ballroom entrance, His Grace, the Duke of Valmont, Lady Marston, and Miss Winifred Grantley, a ripple of surprise moved through the assembled guests. Heads turned, whispers began, fans fluttered as society absorbed the shocking reappearance of a woman long thought gone. Winifred held her head high, though her heart pounded painfully against her ribs. She had once been at home in such settings, moving with confidence through ballrooms and drawing rooms. Now she felt like an imposter, waiting to be exposed. Hugh guided her through the crowd, stopping to exchange greetings with acquaintances who regarded Winifred with barely disguised curiosity. Lady Marston soon drifted to join a group of contemporaries, leaving them to navigate the ballroom alone. "Is he here?" Winifred asked quietly as they completed a circuit of the room. "By the punch bowl," Hugh replied without looking in that direction, "with a young woman who must be Miss Drummond, his fiancée." Winifred resisted the urge to turn and look. "What now?" "Now," Hugh said, his lips curving in a slight smile, "we dance." Before she could protest, the orchestra began a waltz, and Hugh led her onto the floor. Other couples made way, eager for a closer view of the scandalous Miss Grantley and her ducal partner. "Everyone is watching," Winifred murmured as they took their positions. "Let them," Hugh replied, his hand firm at her waist. "It serves our purpose to be noticed." As they moved through the steps of the waltz, Winifred gradually relaxed into the familiar rhythm. Hugh was an excellent dancer, guiding her with subtle pressure and perfect timing. For a few precious minutes, she allowed herself to forget their purpose and simply enjoy the sensation of being in his arms. "You're smiling," Hugh observed, his own expression softening. "It suits you." "I had forgotten," she admitted, "how much I enjoyed dancing." "There are many pleasures you've denied yourself these past years," he said quietly. "Perhaps it's time to reclaim them." The intimate suggestion brought color to her cheeks, but before she could respond, the music ended. Hugh led her from the floor, pausing to introduce her to several of his acquaintances. With each introduction, Winifred felt her confidence growing. She had feared open contempt or cutting remarks, but found instead polite curiosity and, in some cases, genuine warmth. "Lord and Lady Westmoreland," Hugh said, approaching an elderly couple. "May I present Miss Winifred Grantley?" Lady Westmoreland studied Winifred with sharp eyes. "Grantley, James Grantley's sister, are you not?" I remember you from your season. Bright girl, excellent conversation, unlike most of the simpering debutantes. You honor me with your recollection, Lady Westmoreland, Winifred replied, touched by the unexpected kindness. Terrible business with your brother, Lord Westmoreland added gruffly. Never believed the official account myself. James was many things, but he wasn't a fool with a pistol. Winifred exchanged a glance with Hugh. I'm grateful to hear you say so, my lord. Is that why you've returned? Lady Westmoreland asked shrewdly, to set the record straight. Before Winifred could answer, a commotion near the ballroom entrance drew their attention. Lady Marston approached swiftly, her expression urgent. Hugh, she's here, she said in a low voice. Catherine Ellington has just arrived with Lord Pembroke. Winifred felt the blood drain from her face. Catherine and Pembroke. How is that possible? A deliberate attempt to undermine us, Hugh surmised, his jaw tightening. Catherine must have sought him out after Havenwood. They're coming this way, Lady Marston warned. Prepare yourselves. Winifred steeled herself, drawing strength from Hugh's steady presence beside her. When Lord Pembroke appeared through the crowd with Catherine on his arm, she faced him without flinching. Pembroke was much as she remembered, tall and lean, with aristocratic features and cold eyes. 4 years had added silver to his temples, but had not diminished his arrogant bearing. He stopped abruptly when he saw Winifred, recognition, and then shock flashing across his face. Miss Grantley, he drawled after a moment's hesitation. Returned from the dead, I see. Lord Pembroke, she acknowledged, her voice remarkably steady. I was never dead, merely absent. And now mysteriously present, under the Duke's protection. His gaze slid to Hugh, calculating and hostile. How fascinating. Catherine stepped forward, triumph in her expression. I told you she was the same Winifred Grantley, my lord, the one who fled after her brother's disgrace. Indeed you did, my dear, Pembroke replied, though you failed to mention how enchanting she remains. The predatory note in his voice made Winifred's skin crawl. Hugh moved imperceptibly closer to her, a silent statement of support. Miss Ellington has been most informative about your recent activities, Pembroke continued, addressing Winifred directly. Though I confess I'm curious what brings you back to London after so long an absence. Surely not the social season. Actually, Winifred replied, meeting his gaze steadily, I've returned to discuss the events of April 15th, 4 years ago. The morning my brother died. A flicker of unease crossed Pembroke's face before his mask of sardonic amusement returned. A tragic day, to be sure, but ancient history now. Is it? Hugh interjected, his tone deceptively casual. I find history has a way of resurfacing when least expected. Miss Drummond might find this particular history illuminating, Winifred added, glancing toward the young woman who stood nearby, watching their exchange with evident confusion. Before she commits herself to marriage. Pembroke's expression hardened. I suggest you consider your next words very carefully, Miss Grantley. Slander is a serious matter. It isn't slander when it's the truth, she replied, her voice gaining strength. I saw you murder my brother, Lord Pembroke. I watched you shoot him after he refused to compel me to marry you. Gasps arose from those close enough to overhear. Pembroke's face flushed with anger. How dare you make such accusations? Your brother died in a legal duel. The duel had concluded, Hugh interrupted. James Grantley was wounded, but very much alive when you arrived and took matters into your own hands. Preposterous, Pembroke snapped. There were witnesses. Yes, there were, Lady Marston said, stepping forward with a distinguished gentleman at her side. Colonel Richards was passing nearby that morning. He saw a man matching your description fleeing the scene shortly after the shots were fired. The colonel, a decorated veteran with an air of unimpeachable integrity, nodded gravely. I gave my statement to the authorities at the time, but it was overlooked in the final report. Most irregular. And we have this, Hugh added, producing a folded document from his coat. A sworn affidavit from your former valet, detailing your threats against James Grantley regarding his debts and your interest in his sister. Pembroke's composure cracked. "This is a conspiracy," he hissed. "You cannot possibly expect anyone to believe the word of a disgraced woman and a servant against a peer of the realm." "I believe her," came a new voice. Lord Westmoreland stepped forward, his wife beside him. "James Grantley was my godson. I never accepted the official account of his death." "As do I," added another gentleman, emerging from the growing crowd of observers. "I played cards with James that last week. He spoke of threatening letters from you, Pembroke, demanding his sister's hand in exchange for debt forgiveness." Miss Drummond, pale-faced and trembling, approached her fiancé. "Is this true, Richard? Did you murder this woman's brother?" "Elena, it appears this conversation requires more privacy," Pembroke said, attempting to regain control of the situation. "Perhaps we should withdraw." "I think not," the Duchess of Richmond declared, having arrived to investigate the disturbance in her ballroom. "I believe we all wish to hear your explanation, Lord Pembroke." Cornered and increasingly desperate, Pembroke's gaze darted from face to face, before settling on Winifred with naked hatred. "You," he snarled, lunging toward her, "you should have stayed disappeared." Hugh stepped between them, but not before Pembroke's hand closed around Winifred's wrist with bruising force. She cried out in pain and surprise. "Unhand her immediately," Hugh commanded, his voice like steel. When Pembroke only tightened his grip, Hugh's fist connected with his jaw, sending him staggering backward. Gasps and exclamations erupted around them as two footmen rushed forward to restrain the enraged lord. "You've ruined yourself," Pembroke spat at Winifred as the footmen secured him. "Again, no one will receive you after this spectacle." "You're wrong," Hugh said, moving to stand beside her. "Miss Grantley will be received everywhere as my Duchess." A stunned silence fell over the assembly. Winifred turned to Hugh in shock, certain she had misheard. "Hugh," she whispered, "what are you saying?" He took her hand gently in his, unmindful of their audience. "I'm saying, rather badly and with terrible timing, that I love you, Winifred Grantley. That I have loved you since you called me insufferably arrogant at Almack's 4 years ago, and that I would be honored if you would consider becoming my wife." Tears filled Winifred's eyes as the truth of his feelings she had scarcely allowed herself to acknowledge, let alone return, washed over her. "But my reputation, the scandal, is of no consequence," he finished for her. "Not to me, and not to anyone whose opinion matters." Lady Marston stepped forward, beaming with approval. "Well said, nephew. Now, perhaps we might continue this discussion somewhere more private, after Lord Pembroke has been shown out, of course." As if awakening from a trance, the Duchess of Richmond instructed her footmen to remove Pembroke from the premises. Miss Drummond, tears streaming down her face, tore the engagement ring from her finger and threw it at his feet before being led away by sympathetic friends. Catherine Ellington, finding herself suddenly abandoned by her ally, attempted to slip away unnoticed. Lady Westmoreland intercepted her with a grip like iron on her arm. "Not so fast, my dear," the elderly matron said sweetly. "I believe you have some explaining to do regarding your role in this unfortunate business." Within moments, Winifred found herself ushered into a small antechamber off the ballroom, accompanied by Hugh, Lady Marston, and the Westmorelands. As the door closed behind them, shutting out the excited babble of gossip, she turned to Hugh in bewilderment. "Did you plan all of this?" she asked. "The confrontation, the witnesses?" "The confrontation, yes," he admitted. "The proposal, no, that was entirely unplanned and poorly executed." He ran a hand through his hair, suddenly looking boyishly uncertain. "I had intended to court you properly once Pembroke was dealt with. To give you time to know your own mind." "I think," Lady Marston observed dryly, that events have rather overtaken your careful plans, Hugh. Lord Westmoreland harumphed in agreement. Dramatic business, proposals in the middle of ballrooms. In my day, we spoke to the lady's father first. James would have approved, Winifred said softly, the mention of her brother bringing a bittersweet pang. He always said you were one of the few men in London with both principles and backbone. Hugh's expression softened. I wish I had known him better. What happens now? Winifred asked, reality beginning to intrude on the moment. Pembroke still has influence, connections. Will the authorities truly act on our evidence? They will, Lord Westmoreland stated with conviction. I'll see to it personally. The Home Secretary owes me a favour or three. And society, Winifred pressed. I may have been vindicated regarding James's death, but my flight, my years as a governess, will make an excellent chapter in the memoirs of the Duchess of Valmont, Hugh interrupted, taking her hands in his. If that is, you haven't yet answered my question. Winifred looked up at him, this man who had pursued her not out of lust or avarice, but out of a deep sense of justice and, incredibly, love. The false belief that had guided her for so long that she was unworthy of happiness, tainted by scandal, began to crumble in the face of his steadfast regard. Yes, she said, her voice clear and certain. Yes, Hugh, I will marry you. His smile was like sunrise after the longest night. Without regard for propriety or their audience, he gathered her into his arms and kissed her, a gentle, reverent kiss that promised a lifetime of such moments. Lady Marston cleared her throat delicately. Well, that's settled then. I suggest we return to Valmont House immediately. There's a wedding to plan, and the season waits for no man. Or woman. 3 months later, on a perfect June morning, Winifred Grantley stood before the altar of St. George's Church in Hanover Square. The pews were filled with the cream of London society, many of the same people who had once whispered behind their fans about her disgrace, now murmuring in approval at her radiant appearance in Duchess-worthy ivory satin and Valmont family lace. Lord Pembroke was notably absent, having fled to the Continent ahead of his arrest. His hasty departure was considered confession enough by society, which had turned against him with the same fervour it had once embraced him. Miss Ellington, too, had retreated to her family's country estate, her social aspirations in tatters. As Hugh recited his vows, his voice strong and sure, Winifred felt the last shadows of her past finally recede. 4 years of hiding, of denying her true self, of believing she was unworthy of love or happiness, all washed away by the light in his eyes as he promised to cherish her all the days of his life. I, Winifred, take thee, Hugh, she began, her voice steady despite the emotion that threatened to overwhelm her. When she finished her vows, a single tear of joy traced its way down her cheek. Hugh reached up to brush it away, his touch infinitely tender. No more tears, he whispered for her alone, except those of happiness. As they emerged from the church as Duke and Duchess of Valmont, the assembled crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Rose petals showered down upon them, bright against the cobblestones. In that moment, surrounded by celebration and holding tight to Hugh's arm, Winifred knew that her brother's memory had been honoured, justice had been served, and her own life, so long defined by a single night of tragedy, had been redeemed by love. The secret that had once been her curse had led her, through a winding path of hardship and courage, to the greatest blessing of all, a future filled with truth, acceptance, and the freedom to be fully herself, beloved not despite her past, but including all that had shaped her into the woman she had become.